Vicks VapoRub and candle wax. Chad Johnson has the solution to treat Shedeur Sanders' oblique injury in 2 days. Shedeur Sanders suffered an oblique injury at the worst possible time. In the middle of a four-man quarterback battle as a fifth-round pick, his future could be in serious jeopardy if he can't get back on the field soon. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, or Dylan Gabriel could run away with the starting job and roster spots. But have no fear, not a Dr. Chad Johnson is here, claiming he has the remedy to get Shedeur back in the mix. That it's not just Shedeur, though. A slew of injuries have already hit the preseason. Matthew Stafford has been dealing with a back issue that required an epidural. Devon Achane is nursing a calf strain. Joe Mixon has a frustrating foot injury. And even Chris Godwin, still recovering from a gruesome leg injury, has already tweaked his ankle. That's why Johnson believes that the NFL needs to hire him to solve these problems. He insists he can fix it all with a simple presentation. I'll tell you what these NFL teams need to do, UNC. They need to bring me in, and I have a plan. I can do everything with a PowerPoint presentation to keep these fellas and stop them from getting hurt. You just got to camp 2 weeks ago, Johnson stated on Nightcap. It is indeed disappointing to see all of the injuries during camp. But that's the nature of the game. We want everyone to stay healthy 100% of the time, but that simply isn't possible. Football is a vicious sport, and players are going to get hurt, even during practice. Despite injuries being ingrained in the fabric of the game, Johnson still thinks he can solve them, including Shedeur's injury. I could have Shedeur back in 2 days. You talking about your oblique hurt? Get you some Vicks VapoRub, rub it on the area where you hurt at, right? Johnson shared, and he didn't stop there. Now, the first part of Johnson's advice was sound. Vicks VapoRub is a quality and highly trusted brand that can relieve aches and pains. It just probably can't subside the pain entirely for an oblique injury. However, the second part of Johnson's advice was completely foolish. You should never rub hot candle wax on your skin. It can cause a rash, blisters, as well as swelling and tearing of the skin. Not to mention it sticks to your fingers and can get into your eyes if you rub them incidentally. That's why Johnson's co-host, Shannon Sharp, quietly warned the audience while Ocho was going off. Please do not attempt this at home, Sharp warned. If you need any more evidence not to try it, Johnson also shared that he didn't even know where the oblique was. He even wondered how Shedeur could injure that part of himself so early on in camp, despite it being a very common injury for quarterbacks to have. So, he's very clearly not a doctor. All in all, it was Johnson getting up to his usual antics. Who knows if he was being serious? The clip came off as funny more than anything else. Remember, this is a man who said he ate McDonald's before every game, as well as once a day. He even claimed it helped him avoid injuries. So, Shedeur is probably better suited to get his medical advice elsewhere. Chad Okocinco Johnson doesn't do small ideas. He does megaphone ones, the sort you could hang from a billboard and still hear in the nosebleeds. So when the livestream lights warmed his face and the topic turned to Shedeur Sanders' oblique strain, Chad unclipped his grin and announced a protocol that sounded like it belonged in a garage infomercial and a spiritual retreat at once. Vicks VapoRub and candle wax. 2 days to feel like game ready, he promised. Or at least 2 days to feel like you'd done everything short of moonwalking back onto the field. He described it like a ritual found in the gaps between superstition and swagger. First, the Vicks, a rue-scented salute, thick and minty, spread like a map across the tender spot so the smell could remind the nerves where they used to be. Then the candle wax, warmed, poured into a protective seal over the ointment. Not to bind flesh, but to bind belief. Heat and smell, baby, Chad said, holding a candle to the camera like a conductor raising his wand. The body listens to the mind. Get the mind to shout, and sometimes the body will whisper back quicker. The clip detonated across feeds. Fans howled with delight. Memes blossomed. Shedeur with a VapoRub crown, a candle labeled Weekend Starter Pack, and a merch parody began its quiet march. Sports radio hosts played the audio on loop, as if it were a new kind of anthem. Even the Browns' equipment room, normally a shrine to nylon, tape, and quiet competence, caught a whiff of mint and curiosity when an intern, daring or desperate for attention, slid a teal jar onto the top shelf with a post-it. From Okocinco. For morale. Inside the team's rehab bay, where the fluorescent lights made every bruise look honest, Shedeur watched the clip between resisted rotations. He cracked a smile that acknowledged the ridiculousness and then, almost imperceptibly, let it widen. He texted a teammate, Imagine if it worked faced with tears of joy, and then deleted the gif he'd found of a waxed-up football. The therapists laughed. The head trainer did not. He was a man who had seen enough fads to start a museum, and his museum had strict rules. Evidence, measurement, patience. But Chad's idea did something the medicine rarely can. It gathered people. Players who'd been sending group texts about coverage routes slipped into the rehab bay with candles tucked under their arms like clandestine offerings. A veteran lineman brought a teal-scented candle with a label he'd defaced. Akasinko approved. A receiver, newly arrived and freshly nervous, sat and listened to Shedeur talk through adjustments while the wax sat on a folding table and played the part of a talisman. The fixture of the joke, the Vicks and the wax, became a prop for presence. Teammates began a micro-ceremony after long sessions. A laugh, a light, a shared grin, then a minute of talk about routes, rhythms, and the little cues that made the offense hum. No clinician in the room would confuse candlelight for a therapy modality. No surgeon would replace a rehab protocol with a live stream. But Kandinsky would have appreciated the choreography. Smell, sight, touch, and then speech, the human version of loading the next play. Chad doubled down on social media, posting a slow-motion clip of a candle flame shaking, as if in applause. He called it a confidence accelerant. The city chimed in. A local bar did a drink special called the Oblique, with a teal-tinged rim, proceeds to a youth football charity. Reporters wrote pieces that balanced on a wire between satire and sentiment. A celebrity stunt had nudged a locker room toward an unintended cure, togetherness. Of course, there were the necessary adults. The team doctor published a clear thread about tissue healing times and evidence-based rehab. He nodded at morale and mischief, but drew a line where anatomy begins and performative optimism ends. Confidence helps, he wrote. Candles don't reattach fibers. His note settled the boardroom logic back into place, and did not, somehow, take the laughter away. When Shedeur finally jogged on to a practice field weeks later, it wasn't because mint and molten wax had rewritten biology. It was because he followed the calendar of ice therapy, progressive loading, and careful assessment. Yet when he passed the equipment room, he paused.